.com, H07, IHE, and Snap. We're building the future, never looking back.
What if the radiology room didn't need 4 walls, fluorescent lights, and a creaky chair from 1998? Well, in this episode of Imaging Informatics Unplugged, we're joined by Mike Wesolowski, CEO of Luxsonic, a company that has spent the past 8 years building immersive diagnostic-grade environments in virtual reality. Yes, actual diagnostic packs in your VR headset. Now, this isn't a metaverse gimmick. This is real, it's regulated, and it's being used to train med students, to host virtual tumor boards, and to make us rethink what access to radiology could look like, especially in remote and underserved communities. We talk about what it took to build this from the ground up, how they navigated regulatory approval, and why physical space might be one of the most overrated things in diagnostic imaging. So whether you're into radiology, innovation, or just trying to sit less while reading more, this episode has something for you. And hey, if you're into conversations like this, don't forget to like and subscribe and share this with someone that still thinks VR is for gamers. With all that said, let's jump into it. Well, thank you very much, Mike, for joining Imaging Informatics Unplugged. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. I was playing with my son's VR headset last night. So maybe, I believe you've been around as a company since 2016 or so?
2017, yeah.
17, okay. So we're looking at about 8 years. And so I'd like to know the VR headset is fitting into the radiologist workflow now, as opposed to kind of when you were introducing this probably seemed very alien. And so I'd like to hear a bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. So first of all, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion. A lot's changed to your point, when we first started, the first version of the Oculus was just coming out, and it was seen as a novelty. And it's still, in certain circles, the VR is seen as a novelty. But what we've seen over those 8 years, it's been a transition from a curiosity to a device that can really provide value in the workplace. In healthcare, we're seeing adoption in radiology, in education, in surgery. Across the board, we're seeing more and more adoption, and more health systems are looking at the technology as a potential solution to real problems. And so in radiology specifically, we're starting our first, major deployments now in diagnostic radiology departments for the purpose of diagnostic work. It's taken a long time to get here. We had to, go through the regulatory process like you would for any sort of medical imaging software. So we're now a Class 2, software as a medical device for diagnostic radiology, and starting our first real deployments. So it's a very exciting time.
Wow, that's very cool. So what regions are we looking at? Is that US, Europe, Canada that you're seeing those operational?
Yeah, so we have customers in Canada. We have Class 1 FDA approval in the US, and we're submitting for our Class 2 right now. So we expect to have Class 2 in the US for diagnostic work before the end of the year, and starting to work with partners in Europe to get clearance in Europe as well. So there's definitely more and more interest for this technology and this type of technology, and we're excited to be at the forefront. And it can be a lonely road leading with this type of vision, but we're even starting to see some of the larger players in radiology software come out with early versions of PACS viewers for VR headsets as well. So
what are you seeing as far as that those deployments in the radiologist workflow? Is it replacing a PACS workstation, or is it integrating with a back-end PACS or VNA? I'd love to hear more about the integration part of this.
Yeah, so over the years we've migrated from thinking about our system as a standalone remote workstation to now a full platform where we integrate with either existing medical informatics systems. So we usually install a integration server within the hospital's infrastructure, behind their firewalls, behind all their security, and then use that as an integration point to existing, PACS, RIS, and systems. And then that serves as a integration point for multiple remote workstations that will use VPN to connect into the health system. Very similar to like a home workstation or a teleradiology setup.
Interesting. So really, you've got this back end server that's integrated to the PACS, VNA, or whatever imaging management solution, and then really it's just standards at that point that are allowing.
Exactly. And that took us some time to get there as well because starting off again we thought, hey, we can just provide a workflow and we can easily integrate with everyone. And as you know, two hospitals might have the same informatics system, but it's configured differently. So we needed to figure out ways to be able to really standardize at least our portion of the integration. So
Interesting. And so the adoption portion, I imagine there's always these cutting edge folks that want the latest and greatest. I'm curious, those aren't the hard ones to convince. It's, the people that have been doing a practice maybe for about a decade now or longer, they're used to a certain way of doing things. Have you been able to kind of overcome the barriers of this is a very alien device that they're going to put on their head?
yeah. Well, and you know, once they put it on their head, they have an aha moment. It's almost getting to that point. Because we have users now and we have radiologists who are, early stage in their career, mid stage in their career, and late stage in their career. And once they've started to use the system and they see, first of all, the benefit of having a remote workflow, um, that they can take anywhere with them. All you need is an internet connection. Uh, that has a real impact on the way that radiologists work. But it is sort of changing hearts and minds, and that takes a long time. Just getting a radiologist away from the idea that you have to be sitting at a desk, you have to be at a workstation to do your work efficiently. Um, that it takes time. But once they put a headset on, sit down on the couch and realize, oh, I can still review my cases and I can do it quickly. I can generate a report, send it back to the system, and I don't have to be at that desk, in that workstation, in that reading room environment. It opens up a whole lot of possibilities for people. But it's definitely, I mean, there's an adoption curve for a reason, right? It, and if we sort of like to look at the transition from film to digital as a good example of a parallel.
Mhm.
It took 30 years to go from, film to digital, and in many cases, I mean, we still have places around the world that are still doing film. So,
Yes.
this type of a transition takes time. Um, so we're not expecting to replace the reading room in the hospital tomorrow. Uh, but the way that we're approaching it is you can use this system as an adjunct or an ancillary system to your traditional workstation. Take it with you wherever you go. Take it to your next conference and be able to read a few cases, or take it to the cottage on the weekend. So you're not having to set up a
Mhm.
reading room at the cottage. Or even in some places in bigger cities, if you're living downtown in Toronto, you may not have space for a full reading room at home.
Yeah.
So now you have a home reading room and a headset. It's again, there's going to be a transitionary period, and we're seeing greater adoption now than we were, 5 years ago even.
So you mentioned a large part of the world still is on film, and I've been fortunate enough to volunteer with RadAid. They're a great organization that helps bring digital efforts for radiology into the emerging markets and so on. I'm curious. One of the challenges I've seen is when you're in a Nepal reading room and it's bright as it is here right now,
Yeah.
and you're trying to read, and so I imagine that's one of the great things, selling points. You've got this opportunity. You've got perfect luminance.
Absolutely. And we have complete control over the luminance in the headset. So we can drive the LCDs in the headset. Um, and we also have a contained system. So we can turn off all of the environmental lighting in the virtual environment so that you can be in a black void, and just focus on the images. The other really interesting bit is, you are very focused when you're in VR. When you put on that headset, a lot of the distractions that you would normally have in a busy reading room in the hospital, let's say, especially like if you're in a bullpen with a bunch of residents, it kind of disappears because you have your own environment that's self-contained. So yeah, there's the privacy issues kind of disappear as well, because if you're trying to check an image on a phone or on a laptop, well, you have to be a little bit worried, but no one can see what's happening inside the headset. So there's
That's an
yeah,
interesting point.
yeah, there's a number of these interesting sort of benefits that, because you're working in VR, you have access to.
So I mentioned last night I was tinkering around with my son's Quest 3. It is very it's amazing. I do find sometimes there's a limit that my head can take. And so what is the feedback that you get from whether it's RADs or anyone that's using this in their practice? Is there a duration point where you recommend they stop or they switch to something else?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think right now, even though the ergonomics of these headsets has gotten a lot better than it used to be, 2 to 3 hours is sort of the limit where we say, it's good to take a break every couple hours. And we've had radiologists in headset for 3 hours at a time, and they take off the headset and they're like, "Where am I?" Like, we actually had to put a clock in the virtual reading room environment so that people would know how long they've actually been in the environment, because you sort of hit this flow state where nothing exists outside of the virtual reading room and you just keep going. But we do recommend
Like a
definitely,
casino.
2 to 3 hours. And honestly, as the headset ergonomics continue to improve, as they get lighter, I think we will be able to have people eventually, replace their traditional reading room. It's not there yet, and that's not our initial goal either.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Um, one of the things I'm interested in is you touched on the fact that the first question, radiology is just one of the customers that that are interested in using this. I imagine this has had a very big shift on the way education can be done, and probably across different specialties. Could you share a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, even in radiology, we've done a number of educational research studies. One out of the University of Saskatchewan, for example, where they taught medical students a radiology rotation and compared that to teaching on a Zoom call. And overwhelmingly, all of the students preferred learning in VR. They found they were better able to focus on the content, fewer distractions, but also they felt like they're actually there with the attending physician, as opposed to sort of what we're doing, which is a very 2D experience. So in VR, you get that benefit of presence, which you don't necessarily get on a Zoom call. And they even scored slightly better in, post-learning assessments in VR versus
I was about to
traditional.
ask that. So it
Yeah.
actually had a
It did have a
quantifiable
meaningful
impact on the
impact.
outcome.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in education, we're seeing that's one of the areas where, in general, in healthcare and medicine, we are seeing the greatest adoption, and the greatest interest. So being able to provide standardized simulation labs that can be accessed 24/7, so that your students can learn at their own pace, have access to resources that they wouldn't have access to necessarily in the clinical environment. We did an early project where we filmed a lap chole procedure in 360 video. and that was being used by a nursing department as the first intro to a surgery, so that they didn't have to book students to come into the operating room and dedicate all those resources to that first observational experience. So I think there are lots of different applications for this technology in healthcare, not just in radiology, but across the board.
So in that, either it's training or maybe you're collaborating with a peer on a case. Um, are there collaborative tools that allow you to be able to kind of share a session, or do you have to kind of say open up this session number and you're kind of guiding them through it at the same time? How does that work?
No, yeah, so we've purposefully built our virtual reading room to kind of mimic the feeling of the physical reading room in the
Mm.
sense that you can invite people directly into your virtual reading room so that it's that over the shoulder view of a case. You don't have to fiddle with MRN numbers. You can literally just pull up the case in your virtual reading room, privately, securely invite someone into your reading room environment, talk to them. They have an avatar, you have an avatar, and you go through a case in real time. We even with Wake Forest Baptist, we did in the U.S. We did tumor boards in VR where we had no one in a hospital. We had people in different locations in their houses coming together for a virtual tumor board, and so we had a radiologist, oncologist, pathologist all going through their case data in real time. So it was really cool.
So very, yeah, it's very, I don't know, Brave New World. It sounds very cool. Like we're in the future already.
Well, we're pushing for it, so.
So in 2017, that was, a few years after AlexNet, and the true buzz of AI in imaging
Yeah.
was just starting to light around that time. I'm curious, how does AI or LLMs or any
Yeah.
have a role in VR at all?
100%. I mean, I think the combination of AI and some of the things that we can do in VR, make it a really unique environment. So combining AI with eye tracking, voice commands, gestures, um, being able to leverage LLMs for things like, and this is already happening in non-VR applications, but we have a dictation reporting system where the goal is you never have to type on a keyboard, you never have to click a mouse, where you're doing your dictation reporting right in the headset, and you click a virtual button and it will process the report and generate that report from your dictated free text. So and that is a great obvious, application of AI in radiology. But then thinking about some of the data that we can generate with eye tracking, for
Mm.
example. So imagine for educational purposes, you can have the best radiologist at your institution. We can see how they scan, what their scan patterns are, where they're looking at different types of images and different types of modalities, and then use that to help train, your first year, second year residents to say, look, this is how the best radiologists are reviewing cases. You can follow along and see how they actually, how they interpreted that case in a way that's really challenging outside of VR. So.
It would be interesting to correlate that with like some sort of peer review scores that are coming out, and then you can see, because everyone has bad days, so
Absolutely.
maybe on this day you were reading in an irregular way, your eyes were behaving.
It, exactly, and even for quality assurance and quality control, right? Imagine you are tired, and in the literature we know that if you're tired and you're reading, you're more prone to make mistakes. But now you can have a little friendly check at the end to say, hey, you forgot to look at this quadrant of the image. Do you want to have a look? Or maybe you're a little tired. Do you want to take a break? There are privacy and other issues that we have to take into account, and we never want to do anything without the consent of the radiologist or the user. But these are the type of tools that become available and become more readily available. And if you think about, our top athletes, we know everything. As an athlete, you know everything about your performance. We don't really do that for physicians right now. And this is an opportunity to provide data and metrics that you can use to improve your own performance if you so choose. So I think it is a brave new world, like you said. There are many different possibilities for the uses of this technology. and combining it with artificial intelligence.
Incredible. So we're at about the 18-minute mark. This is around the time that we like to have these conversations for. So I'd like to just pitch it to you. If there's any closing thoughts that you have, and maybe like I'd love to hear what your thoughts are for VR in the long run. I think outside of radiology there was this big, huge outside of healthcare there was a big emergence of interest. It seems like maybe there's a bit of a dip in the interest now. But yeah, closing thoughts and kind of where we're going for the future in general in healthcare.
Yeah, I think like any new technology, there's definitely a hype cycle, and what comes out of the hype cycle are real applications that solve real problems. And that's where I think we need to focus on with VR. And that's where I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of different areas in healthcare. Just to give you one example, in surgery right now, we're seeing the Apple Vision Pro being used to replace surgical monitors. And the reason for that is actually partly because of better ergonomics. So when a surgeon is looking at a surgical monitor, they have their head, tilted the entire time. Well, with a virtual monitor, you can put that anywhere in the room. You can have it right above the patient. Each person can have their own view. And so it actually improves the ergonomics of the situation using a VR headset. So I think we're going to see more and more of these sort of niche applications, absolutely, but more acceptance of the technology in healthcare and more deployment of the technology to solve real problems within the healthcare space. And that's where I see the next 5-10 years going, is a real push to solve real problems.
So that's a great way to close it out. Thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.